All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher here with Drew Dinsick. Today, we're going to talk about some NBA futures markets post the draft, Rookie of the Year, and the conference outrights and championship market after Chris Paul, Kristaps, Marcus Smart were all traded, etc. Then we're going to continue our division preview look at markets in the NFC East, and then we're going to welcome in Ben Brown from PFF to talk schedule strength and all things NFL. But Drew, how are you? How was your weekend?
It was tremendous. Just beautiful weekend. Relaxing. Didn't bet much. Watched a lot of tennis. So it was about as ideal a weekend as you could ask for. We had some beautiful weather here finally on the West Coast. So that's got me in a great mood. But I'm pretty excited about today's show, to be honest with you. These are awesome topics. The state of the NBA right now is super interesting. We have a lot of influx. And, I think at this point, if you are really shopping hard in some of these markets, if you're trying to corner price, it's worth kind of always having this in the back of your mind. Why am I making this bet now? You literally are trying to capture some sort of value before the market correctly adjusts to the strength of these teams. You may be trying to get ahead of an expected move you would think would shape some of these markets. Because it's a long season. Any bet you make now, particularly in these future markets, for champion of East, West, or NBA title for next season aren't going to get resolved for 11 months. So you need a real good reason to try to lock in a price that you think is just never going to be better. And I think there are a couple of those, but it's interesting what a transitory time it feels like we're in the NBA right now, is particularly coming out of a draft where you had a lot of really interesting young talent. You have a lot of teams that have stockpiled young talent. And the questions are swirling about, who's going to add the right vets, who's going to put the chemistry together to get, a championship contender out of the blue. And, almost certainly there's going to be some surprises. So excited to hear some of your perspective on this, but it is sort of fascinating, the state of the NBA overall and, sort of the transition time we're in.
Yep, no, definitely. Lots to unpack. Let's start off talking about the outright markets. Title East-West after the trades, Chris Paul to the Warriors. I don't think that moves the needle a ton in terms of swapping out Jordan Poole for Chris Paul. But what I do think is maybe more material is that it's just a display of intent from the Warriors and could portend future moves, and also just reflects how the team is completely all in for this season and has given up on the two pathways. So I think that you're not so much looking at it necessarily as just a straight swap of Poole for Paul. You're looking at it, all right, well, there's probably going to be further moves down the track, and then also gives them a bit more flexibility where, if it's not working with Paul, then they can flip Paul's contract, which is much more movable, I think, than Jordan Poole's was. So the Warriors, again, in the West is so loaded that I wouldn't touch the Warriors at plus 350 to win the West, or 12-1 to win the title. Plus 650 to win the West. Still not super appetizing, but what do you think of Golden State now?
I'm pretty much out on them almost entirely, especially at price. I get it. They could make one more run, sure. But in kind of keeping with the spirit of sort of the changing of the tide, it feels like the Warriors are going out, and I don't realistically see a way that they could make any moves where I'm especially excited about this roster. Chris Paul barely moves the needle for me. I really don't understand how his particular game of basketball and where he is at his state in his career, like, how does that fit at all? I mean, is he basically your sixth man? Is he just running the bench unit? You're really going to take the ball out of Steph Curry's hands ever? Like for Chris Paul to get mid-range twos? I don't see it. Maybe there's a way that ultimately the experience and the the degree to which these guys know basketball, they find ways to succeed that I just can't see. It's very possible. But I was surprised by the move. It really doesn't make me think that the Warriors are doing anything this season. It's just more of a sign that, that the idea of trying to usher in the next generation while the previous generation was still competing for title, like that seems to have failed. It was going to be tough to achieve regardless, but shipping Poole is sort of the kind of waving the white flag on that idea in its entirety.
Yep, I agree. And I think the big problem for the Warriors is it wasn't so much Poole last season, though he was much worse than the previous season. It's that Draymond and Clay took a step back where they were +3, +4 type of players who are now +1.5 to +2 type of players. I do think they have some scope in that. Wiggins coming back, the fact that, defensively you lose all of the Poole and Wiseman minutes and probably JaMychal Green minutes, and then you replace them with Poole and Gary Payton and more Wiggins, and just defensively you get a lot better. But still, it doesn't ultimately in a closing lineup, like is Chris Paul even in it? That's very small playing Paul next to Stephen Curry. And that creates some other stuff. Is Chris Paul going to be fine coming off the bench and sitting out playoff games down the stretch? I'm not too sure about that. So I don't think it's a lock by any means that Chris Paul ends the season on the team. I think there is one big bet to make in the West. I don't understand the pricing on this at all. And that's that the Memphis Grizzlies are 12-1 to win the West. And the Grizzlies have been the top 2 seed the past 2 seasons. Their 3 best players are all extremely young and still have upside to come. When Jaren, and Bane were on the floor together, the Grizz were +12, +13 net rating. Like that's in the ballpark of what you want your core kind of groups to be putting up. That's, Jokic, Gordon, Murray type of territory. They were more like +15, but, these guys have youth and upside to come. And also just the fact that I think people might kind of forget in the jar, think losing Tyus is too big of a deal when you're looking at things like winning the West. And now I think this team all of a sudden is just one swing away where they have pretty much all of their assets. They gave up a couple of firsts for Smart, but they still have a treasure chest there. They have a lot of kind of mid-size contracts that can be aggregated. So I think when you're looking at this Memphis team now, don't look at them just as they are currently. Like look at them as a team that has a lot of scope to add an additional, +2 to +3 type of player, or even go for an even bigger swing. And so when you factor that in, when you factor in the youth, just how good this team has been the past 2 years, like I'm not sure I like them any less than the Suns to win the West. And I think the Grizzlies should arguably be the second favorite behind the Nuggets. But what do you think of the Grizz?
I think the Grizzlies should be the second favorite behind the Nuggets. And I think if you were to blindfold me and say you can only have one bet on the board, these are your choices. Grizzlies to win the West at 12-1 is the bet. I 100%, I will have Grizzlies in pocket at some point between now and when the season gets started. I get it that Ja missing a huge chunk of the beginning of the season has the potential for the price could drift a little bit. Right. You could wake up around Christmas and, be looking at like a 20-1. That's fine. But your point of, the fact that they have sat on their hands, they've sat on their assets now for 2 seasons and, been very, very patient. And it cost them a run in the playoffs this year, certainly, the way that team was composed. Right. If they had exercised some of their, if they had taken some chances, some swings at the trade deadline, they probably could have put together a team that at least threatened the Nuggets in the West this year, if not outright win the West. But they elected to go with what they had. Dillon Brooks obviously kind of, limited them from reaching any kind of potential on top of the Ja Morant hand injury and just a bad matchup with the Lakers in the playoffs. And they've already shown an ability now to get a little bit creative, to get a little bit aggressive. I like the trade for Marcus Smart. As you were speaking, I'm salivating at some of the players who are in that +2, +3 range who could be added. And they're in a unique position where their team is ready to peak in the next 2 seasons, and they know it, and they seem to be real willing to take the chance to really fortify this roster. So Grizzlies to win the West, I think, is a bet, particularly in that 12-1 range, even though there is a very real possibility that it could drift between now and say Christmas. But if we wake up and there's headlines between now and the start of the season that they've added somebody in that range that you're talking about, and now they have a closing 5 that is just on paper best in the West, I won't be surprised.
Yep. The other thing there too is that Desmond Bane was banged up all of last season with that toe injury that he did a few weeks into the year. He'll be better this coming season, I think. All right. Before we move off the NBA, quick thought on Rookie of the Year. Now, we talked about this a little bit last week, and what I probably neglected to mention is that it's unclear whether this 65-game rule that applies to MVP and All-NBA, if that applies to every award. The CBA is not finished yet, so that is not clear, and that impacts this market a fair bit. If you've got a guy who's minus 200, and if he plays 64 games, he's ineligible to win the award, that would be a problem. So I would want certainly clarity on that before touching Wembanyama at minus 200. I think with health and with games played, I think that Wembanyama is close to just walk it in type of winner, where I don't think we need to go into why Victor Wembanyama is good, but I think he's a defensive player of the year flyer, let alone a rookie of the year flyer. I mean, team shot under 50% from two when he was on the floor. I think he's plus 14 on off. He won DPOY Rookie of the Year and MVP in a professional European league. So I think that Wembanyama, with health and games played, is like a violently heavy favorite. Outside of that, though, and while there is some uncertainty still on the board, the guys I would look at, like talking about like deep long shots, Keontae George on Utah, who jacks up a lot of shots. And is going into a backcourt that might have a lot of playing time. If the rumors are true, they want to move Colin Sexton, and Jordan Clarkson is no lock to come back. So there could just be playing time, and George is someone who could put up points. So he would probably be the long shot I would be looking at. I'm not interested in Scoot Henderson unless Dame gets traded, which I guess is in play. But any Rookie of the Year bets for you?
Yeah, it's impossible to look past Wembanyama, in my opinion. You can make a weak case for Chet Holmgren just because the Thunder could be like a top 4 seed in the West, and his offensive production could be an element of that, and he could get some shine just based on being on a winning team. But that's usually not how Rookie of the Year is decided. It's almost certainly just usage and statistical, what are you able to compile? And the fact that Wembanyama, he's kind of the entire Spurs team. He is almost certainly going to have all the opportunity in the world, all the volume he wants offensively, on top of, as you mentioned, being a huge impact player on the defensive side of the ball. So I think all of the other players who have enough opportunity and enough volume potentially, they're just not in great situations in terms of putting together consistent, high quality basketball. So they're skips. I'm going to look. I think if you're going against Wembanyama, you're only doing it based on, hey, there's a chance you could get hurt and miss a chunk of the season. And that's not a good enough reason in my mind. So I think you have to steer clear of, wasting capital in this market outside of the favorite.
Yep, I agree there. Okay, let's pivot to the NFL. But firstly, a reminder to download the RotoWorld app to receive breaking player news all season long. Stay ahead of the competition by favoriting players on your roster. Get the latest injury updates, player news, and much more delivered right to your phone. It's available in the App Store today. Okay, just quickly on the NFC East. Just want to run through some of the win totals for the teams. The Eagles are over under 11 flat. Cowboys 10 flat. Giants 8.5 backed under. And the Washington Commanders 7.5 backed under. It feels like the Commanders win total has been 7.5 backed under for 3 decades. Do you have any bet to make in this division at the moment?
Yeah, I do. And I've taken me a long time to get here. I'm obviously not the first person to say this stuff, but the Cowboys should be closer to Eagles' price on this one. This is, I believe, a 2-team race. The Eagles have a slightly more difficult schedule. The Cowboys have slightly less roster turnover, particularly at key positional spots on the defensive side of the ball, which we've seen from the Eagles. I think ultimately the Eagles, people are remembering what was, in the end of a spectacular playoff run. 2 convincing NFC playoff wins, followed by a narrow miss in the Super Bowl against an all-time team, all-time player. And hidden in their success at the end of the season was a regular season performance that was entirely fueled by just playing very, very weak quarterbacks. Like go look at the who's who of who they did not play last year. And the regular season winning that the Eagles was afforded almost entirely by a very soft schedule, I thought, on top of just kind of taking step forward and being in a relatively weak conference in the NFC. So that you turn the page now and they go from what was clearly the 32nd hardest schedule to one that's in the top three. And, it's going to be a much tougher path for them to get the 1 seed to win the division. And I think that does open up the door for a Cowboys team that is bringing back, has just a ton of continuity. Really, the only thing you can ding the Cowboys for is that they're losing offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, and now Mike McCarthy is calling plays. And I think the market is a little overreacting, if that's possible, in a negative sense, to McCarthy taking over as the offensive coordinator. I don't know for sure that it's going to be a minus at all. Just in general, the personnel that they're bringing back, this should be a better offense than last year, just flat out from the personnel. So you combine that with the fact that the defense is going to be stronger. They retain defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, and all of a sudden, I think you're talking about a Cowboys team that is championship potential. Like, this is a team that should be considered good enough to win the NFC. Absolutely. Good enough to win the Super Bowl. Surely. And, I think realistically, a couple of bounces their way and a little bit of health, and they're going to be the team to beat in the AFC East, considering the Eagles are almost certainly their defense is going to take a step backwards and their schedule is going to be so much tougher. So this is not to say I am in any way against the Eagles or saying that they're going to have some sort of Super Bowl hangover. They may. But I think it's going to be much more about the schedule is going to give them 10, 11 wins type of, median expectation. Whereas the Cowboys, I'm kind of starting with 10 as sort of their floor, just the way that things are going to break for these guys schedule wise. It's looks like a good bet to play them division, play them NFC at plus 650. And if they gain a little bit of steam, I think that those numbers are going to evaporate. What is your read?
Yeah, I like that. And the Eagles, their first 5 weeks are pretty kind schedule-wise, but then they have a stretch that starts in week 6 that goes at Jets, Dolphins, at Commanders, Dallas, at KC, Buffalo, San Francisco, at Dallas, at Seattle, and Giants. Like, that's brutal. And so much harder than what they faced last season. Yeah, if I was going to make one Super Bowl bet in all of the NFC, it would probably be Cowboys 16-1. I think that the Cowboys being 16-1 and the Lions being 20-1, I think there should be a bit more separation there, and the Cowboys should be closer to the 49ers. My best bet in the division is also Cowboys-centric, and it's Tony Pollard to win Offensive Player of the Year at 40-1. You might even be able to get some 50-1, 60-1 about. And the angle on Pollard is, one, we both think that the Cowboys are going to be good and a potential division-winning team. And so that satisfies one of the criterion for Offensive Player of the Year. 2, this is a purely statistical-based award outside of that winning element. And it's basically just about, can you be the best fantasy player at your position, whether it's wide receiver or running back? I think we've mostly moved away from quarterbacks winning this award. Enough voters have publicly said that this is the best non-quarterback award in effect. And so with Tony Pollard, from week 7 to week 16 last season, he was the number 1 running back in fantasy. That is a massive chunk and a massive sample. And now that Ezekiel Elliott is gone, he doesn't have as much competition in the backfield. I think he clearly has the talent. Seems like he's healthy off of the injury as well. He says he's running at full speed. So I think between that, you add all of that up, and I think there's a decent enough chance that Tony Pollard finishes the season as the best running back in fantasy. And with that, on a winning Cowboys team, I think he can win Offensive Player of the Year. And the good thing about this as well is that when you're betting on a Dallas Cowboy to win an award, if he is the most deserving candidate, then he's going to win. You don't have to worry about him being lost on some Falcons team or Seahawks team. When you're betting on a Cowboy or a New York Giant or whatever, if they have the best case, then they're going to win. So for all of those reasons, I like Tony Pollard. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think it's a good bet. He's certainly going to be a huge part of success for this team overall this season, which is crazy because for the most parts, running backs don't matter. We all have kind of gotten to there, but at the same time, he does matter for this team. He needs to take a continuous progression forward, and with the expanded role, he needs to, if he does, ultimately realize what they're expecting from him, and given the system that he's in, he should explode this year. And the Cowboys are going to be in a lot of situations where they're trying to put away games with him on the ground. with him, through the short pass, the high percentage passing. And I think that's realistically sets him up to have some decent success, kind of breaking plays late in games, kind of putting away wins for this team, and letting, just in general, letting, taking over some of the minus EV plays that ultimately went to Zeke Elliott last year, I think is, just going to help this offense in a way that people aren't really counting on. So 40-1, great price.
Yep. Tony Pollard. Let's do it. All right. Let's bring in Ben Brown from PFF now, talk some NFL schedule strength. And also, Ben, to get us started, thank you for joining us. Do you like any bets in the NFC East in terms of division winner, any players up for awards, anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I do think it is probably the most intriguing division in football. A lot of reasons, like you guys suggested. I would say I have two probably, favorite bets coming out of the NFC East. One team that you guys didn't actually mention, I would say, is the Washington Commanders to make the playoffs, plus 300. I am somewhat of a Sam Howell truther, I would say. Very much was kind of impressed by his one game sample last year, but very much I think a guy that kind of has the pieces around him to be really successful. And we have seen him kind of run a pro style scheme at North Carolina, where he did have a lot of pieces in place. And I think he was like PFF's fourth highest graded passing quarterback that season. So although he did fall to the fifth round, I very much like him to be, a decent option as a long-term starter for Washington. I think he's going to showcase that this year. So they're the team that, I kind of want to buy into outside of the other three. I do think we see three playoff teams in this particular division. So the other one, I do think this piggybacks off Drew's really well, but straight exact finish of this division: Cowboys 1, Eagles 2, Commanders 3, and the Giants 4 pays out plus 750. So I think if you do kind of buy into, kind of what Drew mentioned about the Dallas Cowboys and the direction they're heading, and really the one concern being the loss of Kellen Moore, I do think they are kind of at least a lot closer to potentially knocking off the Philadelphia Eagles. So I like that as like a plus 750 bet as well. The Giants are just the team that I kind of want to fade in this division. I know it seems like reports have been really weird coming out of their camp. Obviously, there's the Saquon Barkley news. It does seem like Paris Campbell, for whatever reason, is getting a ton of love as far as like an option to be both, featured in the running game in certain areas, but also from also in the slot. And I think, him running ahead of Wan'Dale Robinson is just not a path to, I would say, long-term success for this passing offense. So I still believe Isaiah Hodgins was more of like a volume play down the stretch, and I'm interested to see if he can actually kind of produce as a wide receiver 1. So I'm concerned about their pass catchers, and if Darren Waller doesn't, kind of return to his 2020 form, I think they could take a step back offensively. And when that does happen, I think Washington's probably going to leap them in this division.
Put a little no. I generally agree with the thesis, which there's the NFC stinks. It's weak.
Right.
We know this. The quality of quarterbacks not close when you stack them up to the AFC broadly. And that said, the NFC East, I look at this division, I'm like, man, these are all good rosters. You have 4 good defenses. There are specific units, especially on the Giants and the Commanders, where you're like, is this the top 5 unit? It might be. Like the front 4 for the Giants is nasty. The defensive line for the Commanders is nasty. The pass catchers on the Commanders are excellent. Like there are certain units that stand out even on these teams, and so it's very tough to eliminate them as like, okay, well, somebody's got to finish 4th. Is it? It's not obviously the Commanders to me. It's not obviously the Giants. You could see some crazy thing here where the odd team out is the Eagles if AJ Brown gets hurt. Which, stop me if you've heard that before. AJ Brown gets hurt not an infrequent amount of times, so I think small injuries here or there are really going to ultimately shape how this division breaks, and so shooting for some prices is really where you want to go, because these are good teams, and particularly if Sam Howell shows you anything, if you get any kind of production from him, otherwise the rest of this roster is pretty good. So it's interesting and intriguing to see how this ultimately will shake out, but I think any order really should not surprise you in the NFC East when it comes down to it. And I guess, so kind of going full circle here to something that I know you're working hard on in terms of qualifying, how challenging these schedules are. The NFC East schedules last year were easy. Okay. And so in a lot of ways, there may be some of that shading how we're evaluating those teams and players. It's entirely possible. The NFC East schedules this year are extremely tough, just in terms of who they ultimately are matching up against. Do you think that, I guess it kind of what you think of in years past, an entire division going from weak to difficult schedule from year to year, what sort of uncertainty does that introduce as you try to handicap these teams? And I guess, do you even agree with the premise? Are these tough schedules for these NFC East foes?
Yeah, I definitely think they are. I think, we have the Giants with the fifth most difficult schedule, NFL wide, easily, the most difficult schedule in the NFC, and the Washington Commanders are kind of right behind them, right? And two teams that, didn't finish at the top of their division, still having a really difficult schedule, I would say, has been a scenario that you can potentially maybe expect a little bit of regression further back for those particular teams. So I think it's a thing. I think people want to hate on, the strength of schedule argument and trying to do some of this handicapping preseason. I think it's not necessarily the approach or not necessarily the idea of doing it. I think it's more kind of the approaches that people have taken with how they evaluate the strength of schedule that has really been maybe some of the difficulties and maybe the reason why we haven't seen it be as predictive going forward. And I think, in some ways PFF does it a little bit different than what other people have. I'm not saying our approach is necessarily like the most sound in the market right now, but I think even looking at, like win total expectation, how that kind of, impacts a team's outlook with who they're actually playing. Like a lot of that already has some of these strength of schedule components baked into it. So in a lot of ways you are double counting. So coming up with a systemic way of actually evaluating in the preseason and moving forward, just how difficult some of these things actually project to be, it is a difficult task, but one that I think is actually going to be very valuable, for teams moving forward, because it is definitely an area that very much hasn't probably been fully captured or fully calculated or fully understood, I would say, right now.
Yep. And Ben, talking about some of the teams that have the most difficult schedules, the three most difficult schedules in your model are the Patriots. A lot of things going great for them at the moment. The Dolphins and the Chargers. Do you think there's any way to attack either of those three teams in the futures market? Any unders that you like of those three in particular, given the difficulty of their schedules?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much kind of, you got to pick your spots with each of these teams. And, I've been, outright fading the Patriots since the Tom Brady divorce or whatever. And it didn't necessarily start out all that well at first, but very much, I think, kind of like you mentioned, like this is a team that in a lot of ways just doesn't have a lot of pieces in place. And they have Mac Jones at quarterback, and you can think what you want, about him. But I think the way in which they're constructed isn't really going to cater to his skill set all that well, right? Like they don't really have a guy that I would say can separate relatively quickly underneath. Juju Smith-Schuster's like probably like a 1 out of every 6 game type of receiver at this point in time at this stage in his career. So I'm concerned. So unless you want to like buy into, Ramondre Stevenson getting 15 carries and Mike Gesicki getting 85 targets, like this is an offense that's going to underachieve. Maybe Bill Belichick has, some more magic in him defensively, but with the schedule and everything else, like they're a pretty hard fade for me. So then, I think you're looking at the Dolphins and Chargers, and a way that I kind of want to play it is like, I in some ways do buy into both the Dolphins and Chargers, at least being competitive in every single one of these games. So I think maybe you kind of like pick your spots on where you could potentially get a good price. And I think the Chargers specifically, open up, with the week 1 matchup against the Miami Dolphins, then I think have, 3 other very winnable games before getting into their week 5 bye. So if you think they're a team that could at least potentially compete for the AFC West, like they're going to need to showcase that in their first 4 games or whatever, their first 5 games. And if they start off with a, undefeated record heading into their bye, like that plus 350 price on their AFC West division future is going to drop dramatically, I think, or at least it's going to move, I would say, in the right direction to the point where if you aren't necessarily sold on them, that's when you can maybe buy into the Kansas City Chiefs or something like that after the week 5, week 6. So I'm trying to, not only piece together the overall strength of schedule, but also kind of find some pockets where if there is a team I want to buy into, like if they are they a team that I want to buy into now, or are they a team that I want to kind of buy into, maybe after their bye, after week 6, week 7. And I think Miami, kind of is a little bit of a wild card, but their schedule, I would say, is almost opposite in a lot of ways, right? Like I think they're looking at, in a lot of ways, best case scenario might be, 5-4 heading into their bye. And then I do think they have some winnable games towards the end of the season. So not necessarily buying into them in the preseason right now, but once they get through that difficult schedule, and if they have kind of, in a lot of ways, treaded water, I think they're a team that could very much set up to be, coming out of their bye, hitting in the right areas, and very much maybe making a run at that AFC East. And I also think waiting on them, we'll give you some more information on where the New York Jets and some of these other teams are actually going to finish in the AFC East. So I think right now, fade the Patriots all season, buy into the Chargers right away, and maybe take a more wait and see approach on the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, I've kind of come to this conclusion with a lot of the AFC just because of how top heavy it is overall and how difficult these schedules are. I'm going to save I'm going to save a lot of my AFC bullets for in season, just kind of in the spirit of what you're laying out there. There is one team that I want to talk about though. When I think of Super Bowl, I think Las Vegas. Not because the Raiders have a chance of getting there, but because it's in Las Vegas this year. I don't know if you guys know that. The Las Vegas Raiders are the least complete roster in the AFC, which is saying a lot because there's some bad rosters. They have some obvious glaring holes in the secondary. This might be one of the worst secondaries we see take the field of any team for last several years. And now you're going to put a relatively injured, not especially not a beacon of health in Jimmy Garoppolo behind an offensive line that has huge questions. This looks like a disaster waiting to happen every which way for the Las Vegas Raiders. And oh, by the way, their schedule is extremely difficult. Do you agree with all of this sentiment? And what do we do with this information in terms of finding ways to bet against what could be the number one picking team next season?
Yeah, I very much agree with everything, right? Like if there's any sort of chance that, Brian Hoyer or Aiden O'Connell are going to start multiple games for this franchise that, in a lot of ways hasn't hit on any specific draft pick since like 2019. Like that's just not a recipe for success whatsoever, right? And I think if you also kind of go back to what I mentioned previously, but in a lot of ways have been fading the Patriots, I think that also maybe calls into question for me like this Bill Belichick coaching tree and just how good or bad it might actually be. But outside of Belichick, I think it has shown itself to be a little bit more fraudulent, with some of his offspring or his, the tree branches coming on down. So yeah, they're a team that I actually want to fade. I don't buy into Josh McDaniels. I honestly don't really buy into Jimmy Garoppolo. And if that's their best case scenario with him actually being healthy and kind of like you said, not at all fitting, or that not necessarily being at all the narrative that he's carried with him throughout his entire career. Like this is a team that is setting up to be 3-14 and could easily have the worst record in football and could easily be, the lowest scoring team as well. So they're not a team that I want to touch. It seems like Devontae Adams could very easily, kind of get frustrated towards the end of the season if he misses a few games as well. They just don't have really any top end talent offensively outside of Josh Jacobs. And if he's getting 18, 19, 20 carries, like that's a team that's just not going to score many points. So I think, the lowest scoring team in football, it is very much, I would say, probably going to be the Las Vegas Raiders when it's all said and done.
Yeah. Paul Max Crosby. I'd like to see Max on a real defense and a real team at some point in his career, because I do think he is one of the 5 or 6 best defensive players in the league. All right, Ben, thank you so much for joining us. I like your new backdrop, I like the chair, I like the kind of brick there as well, and the hat and your black getup. It's very good. Can you tell people where to follow you on social media and what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I appreciate the shout out on the background. I'm in as a fantasy analyst. I have to live up to the moniker, so I'm in my parents' basement right now. Just as good as it gets, basically. But yeah, you can follow me. You can follow me on Twitter, PFF_Ben Brown. We're doing a lot of betting and fantasy related work for PFF. Hopefully, going to get out some new tools for people, and yeah, make sure you check it out. I haven't written much content, but once we hit the season kind of running here in August and September, we're going to get some good futures markets and some, I would say, some pretty solid week-to-week content as well. So make sure you check it out, and definitely appreciate you guys having me on for sure.
Okay, love it. Thanks very much for your time, Ben. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. All right, before we close out, just a reminder, Drew, Sunday mornings mean MLB leadoff on Peacock. You can live stream all game season long, and this week 2 of the biggest surprises of the first half of the season square off when the Minnesota Twins take on the Baltimore Orioles at Camden Yards. Catch the showdown at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. Again, it's exclusively on Peacock. Minnesota Twins.
Biggest surprises to everyone except for the listeners to bet the edge, because I do think that we did plant some flags in Orioles and Twins at the beginning of the season.
Yes.
I certainly have a decent amount of Twins Central in pocket, and if you don't already have some, I don't think it's too late.
I think the Twins might have, going off the top of my head, I think they have one player with an OPS over 780, and they're still like minus 250 to win the division. They don't have any hitters at all. Byron Buxton can't move as well. He's playing DA. Team's been a disaster offensively, and they're still, I think, pretty clearly the best team in the division and rightfully favorites. Before we close out, do you have any bets at the moment or anything you're eyeing?
This week is all about Wimbledon prep, Jay. We are qualifying for the grass tournament at the All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club, something like that. The All England Lawn Tennis Cricket Club. Yes. It's Wimby qualifying week. Draws on Friday. Very excited for this tournament. Women's side wide open. Starting to get a little bit of doing a lot of research on what's going on ultimately with the reigning champion Elena Rybakina dealing with something pretty nasty. So don't know if she's going to be able to defend her title here, and I think that opens things up in the women's side of the draw.
Yeah, and also I don't think Iga Swiatek should be 3-1.
No.
She should be closer to 4 times that price, I would have thought. So yeah, there's a fair bit going on the women's side. Also, I'm not sure Sabalenka is a great bet in the 4-1 region either. So I think it could be a tournament for some long shots, and we'll get into that on Wednesday when we preview Wimbledon and break it all down, which will be fun. In terms of what I'm betting on at the moment, I mean, it's largely just baseball. And I think there are a few angles. I'm sure at some point we'll do a deeper dive on some awards. But the couple things I'd throw out at the moment. One, I think the American League Rookie of the Year market is completely wonky. Masataka Yoshida is 57 years old and has been playing baseball for 2 decades already. So I don't think he's going to win Rookie of the Year unless he does it by significant margin on a team that's likely going to miss the playoffs. So I think him being 2-1 is pretty ridiculous. Josh Young is, I think, rightfully at the top of that market, though the guy that I would have neck and neck with him and perhaps even favorite over him is Gunnar Henderson of Peacock's Orioles on Sunday morning. Get a good look at him close up. He's 5-1 in the market at the moment. That type of range, I think he should be shorter than that. So that is my bet at the moment in the Rookie of the Year market in the AL. And then the last one is I think that the market is still way overrating 2 teams that played each other last night in Houston and the Dodgers, where there is a lot of name brand that is going into their prices in everything, be it the division, be it league, outrights, World Series prices. So looking to fade those teams a fair bit. The Angels can't stop tripping over themselves. Very, very Angels to win a game 25-1. The Angels were up 23-1 with 1 out in the 4th inning, and Shohei was 1 for 7 in the game in the end, which is just insane. Lost the MVP for me that night. And then they lose the next game to the Rockies, which is very on brand. But I think the Rangers should be heavy favorites in that division. And then I think the Giants and the Diamondbacks should be underdogs to the Dodgers still in the West, but should be a lot closer to the Dodgers odds. The Dodgers being minus 250 for that division, I think, is ludicrous. And I think the Giants are the best division bet at the moment. So, yeah, that's what's going on. On my side, on Wednesday, like I said, we'll talk about Wimbledon. I'm sure we'll have plenty of bets there. I think that particularly on the women's side, it's wide open and some long shots. So we'll get into all of that on Wednesday. For the time being, though, don't forget to check out NBCSportsEdge.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks to those watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. Please don't forget to rate and subscribe to us if you're listening to us in podcast form. From Jay Croucher and Drew Dinsick, we'll be back on Wednesday.